Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. On the 8th of March 2014, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people departed Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing and climbed to cruising altitude without any indication of trouble. 38 minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft crossed from Malaysian into Vietnamese air traffic control airspace, it stopped transmitting. Radar contact was lost. No distress call was made. What followed was one of the largest and most expensive search operations in aviation history, spanning millions of square kilometers of the southern Indian Ocean over several years. Satellite data eventually confirmed the aircraft had turned back, crossed the Malay Peninsula, flew south for hours, and ended somewhere in a remote stretch of ocean. A handful of debris fragments washed ashore on Indian Ocean coastlines in the years that followed, confirmed as belonging to MH370. But the main wreckage, the flight recorders, and the aircraft's final resting location have never been found. The reason for the turn, who made it, and what happened in the cabin during those final hours of flight remain entirely unknown. Every theory that has been proposed, mechanical failure, deliberate act, hypoxia, external interference, carries some evidence and significant holes. No conclusion has ever been formally reached, and the official investigation remains technically open. Amelia Earhart's Lockheed Electra. In July 1937, Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan were attempting to circumnavigate the globe near the equator, the longest route possible, and had completed the majority of the journey when they disappeared over the central Pacific Ocean. Their final destination was Howland Island, a tiny low strip of land in open ocean with a newly constructed landing strip built specifically for their arrival. A United States Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, was stationed at Howland and maintained radio contact with Earhart during the approach. The final transmission she sent indicated she and Noonan were running low on fuel and could not locate the island, but the radio communication was inconsistent and at times one-directional. After those last transmissions, nothing. No wreckage was found in the initial search. No confirmed physical evidence of the aircraft has ever been recovered. The search has never fully stopped. Teams continue to investigate sites on Nikumaroro, a remote atoll several hundred miles from Howland, based on skeletal remains found there in 1940 and a range of other circumstantial evidence. Other researchers maintain the aircraft simply ran out of fuel and went down at sea. After nearly 90 years, no physical confirmation of any theory exists. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. This case is almost entirely forgotten outside of aviation history circles, and yet it represents one of the most complete disappearances in the history of commercial aviation. On the 14th of March 1962, a Lockheed Super Constellation chartered by the United States military departed Guam carrying 93 American soldiers and a crew of 3 bound for the Philippines. The flight was routine, the weather adequate, and the aircraft was in normal contact with ground stations during the early part of the route. Then it simply ceased to exist. No distress signal, no wreckage, no bodies. A massive search involving military assets from multiple nations covered thousands of square miles of open Pacific Ocean and found nothing that could be definitively linked to the aircraft. One merchant vessel in the region reported seeing a sudden bright flash in the sky during the night, which has led to speculation about an explosion in flight, but no cause for such an explosion was ever established. The passengers were soldiers, which has kept theories about deliberate targeting alive for decades without any supporting evidence. It remains one of the most thoroughly searched and most completely unresolved disappearances of a large aircraft ever recorded. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501. On the 23rd of June 1950, a Douglas DC-4 carrying 58 people departed New York for Minneapolis and requested permission to descend from 10,000 feet while crossing over Lake Michigan. The request was denied due to traffic, and shortly afterward, the aircraft disappeared from radar. Radio contact ended without any signal of distress. A search of Lake Michigan recovered some debris, personal effects, and human remains, but the main fuselage and the bulk of the aircraft have never been located. Lake Michigan, despite being the 4th largest of the Great Lakes, is shallow enough in many areas that a major wreck should theoretically be findable with modern equipment. Numerous searches over the decades, including expeditions using sonar, have failed to locate it. The exact point of impact remains unknown, the cause of whatever happened is unknown, and the primary structure of the aircraft has been missing for over 70 years. At the time, it was the deadliest commercial aviation disaster in American history, and yet it produced no investigation conclusion because there was essentially nothing to investigate.
BSAA Stardust. The Stardust was a British South American Airways Avro Lancastrian that disappeared on the 2nd of August 1947 while crossing the Andes mountain range on a flight from Buenos Aires to Santiago. The aircraft was on approach to Santiago and sent a final transmission consisting of a coded message and then the letters ETA, estimated time of arrival, followed by the Morse code distress signal STENDEC, which carries no standard aviation meaning and has never been satisfactorily explained. The aircraft never arrived. The search that followed found nothing. In 1998 and again in 2000, the wreckage emerged from a glacier. The aircraft had struck a high-altitude snowfield and been absorbed into the ice, carried downslope over 50 years, and gradually released by the glacier's movement. The physical cause was established as controlled flight into terrain. The crew misjudged their position and descended too early while still over the mountains. But the final transmission remains unexplained. What STENDEC meant, whether the crew knew something was wrong, whether the instruments failed or the crew made a navigational error and remained unaware of it until the final seconds. None of these questions were answered by the recovered wreckage. The word itself has entered aviation terminology as shorthand for a communication that cannot be interpreted. Egyptair Flight 990. On the 31st of October 1999, a Boeing 767 operating a flight from New York to Cairo plunged into the Atlantic Ocean approximately 60 miles south of Nantucket, killing all 217 people aboard. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were recovered relatively quickly, and what they contained produced one of the most prolonged international disputes in aviation investigation history. The American National Transportation Safety Board concluded the crash was caused by the deliberate action of the relief first officer who disengaged the autopilot, cut the throttles, and pushed the aircraft into a dive while the captain was absent from the cockpit, repeating a phrase from Islamic prayer during the descent. Egyptian aviation authorities rejected this conclusion entirely, maintaining the evidence pointed to a mechanical malfunction in the elevator system and that the prayer phrase reflected the officer's response to an emergency rather than its cause. The two countries never reached a shared conclusion. The official American finding is pilot-initiated impact. The official Egyptian finding is undetermined mechanical failure. Both reports exist simultaneously and neither has been retracted. The families of those aboard received no single agreed explanation for what happened. Aer Lingus Flight 712. On the 24th of March 1968, a Vickers Viscount turboprop operated by Aer Lingus departed Cork for London with 61 people aboard and was lost over the Celtic Sea approximately 40 minutes into the flight. Wreckage and victims were recovered from the water, but the investigation produced no definitive explanation for what caused the aircraft to break up and enter the sea. At the time, theories centered on structural failure, wake turbulence from a military aircraft, or a collision with another object. The proximity of military exercises in the area kept that last possibility alive for years. Decades later, investigators revisited the evidence, and some researchers identified findings consistent with a missile strike or structural separation triggered by an external impact, pointing to the presence of military activity in the area at the time. The Irish government conducted a second formal examination of the case in 2002. It concluded the evidence was insufficient to make a determination and formally classified the cause as unknown. The families of those aboard have continued to seek answers, and the case periodically resurfaces in Irish public life whenever new analysis is attempted. No conclusion has ever been reached.
Varig Flight 967. This case is among the most complete disappearances of a modern jet aircraft before MH370. On the 30th of January 1979, a Varig Boeing 707 cargo flight departed Tokyo for Los Angeles, carrying 6 crew members and a large consignment of cargo that included photographic film, artwork, and mail. The flight was uneventful through the early portion of the Pacific crossing, and then contact was lost, without any distress call, at a point roughly halfway across the ocean. No wreckage was ever found, no debris, no trace of the crew or the cargo. The aircraft simply ceased to exist somewhere over the northern Pacific. The cargo included a large quantity of undeveloped photographic film being transported from a Brazilian art exhibition in Japan, which has given rise to theories about the cargo itself, some suggesting the film canisters contained something other than film and the flight was deliberately targeted. None of these theories have been supported by any evidence. The more straightforward explanations involving catastrophic structural or mechanical failure equally lack any physical support. The investigation was closed without a finding. The Northern Pacific is vast and deep, and whatever is there has never been located. South African Airways Flight 295. On the 28th of November, 1987, a Boeing 747 operating a flight from Taiwan to South Africa, with 259 people aboard, transmitted a distress call from over the Indian Ocean reporting a fire in the cargo hold and losing control of the aircraft. The plane crashed into the sea southeast of Mauritius, and all aboard were killed. A major salvage effort in deep water recovered portions of the aircraft, including sections of the cargo area where the fire originated, but the material that was recovered was insufficient to determine what ignited. The cargo manifests indicated the hold contained a number of undeclared or improperly classified items, and the investigation found significant irregularities in how the cargo had been loaded and documented. The South African government at the time was operating under international sanctions related to apartheid, and the manifests showed evidence of cargo being mislabeled to circumvent those restrictions. The fire's precise origin point and its cause were never established from the recovered physical evidence. The nature of the undeclared cargo and who it belonged to has been the subject of ongoing inquiry. An official inquest conducted in South Africa in 1992 was unable to reach a finding on cause. Korean Airlines Flight 007. On the 1st of September 1983, a Boeing 747 carrying 269 people departed Anchorage for Seoul and strayed far off course over Soviet airspace above the Kamchatka Peninsula and Sakhalin Island. Soviet air defenses tracked the aircraft for over 2 hours, scrambled interceptors, and eventually shot it down over the Sea of Japan. This much is established fact. What remains unresolved is how and why the navigation failure that took the aircraft hundreds of miles off course occurred in the first place. The most widely accepted explanation is that the crew failed to properly engage the inertial navigation system, and the autopilot followed a magnetic heading course instead, which diverged progressively from the intended route over several hours. But the crew were experienced, the navigation system was functioning, and the deviation should have been detectable during standard position checks that are required on oceanic routes. Why it was not detected for hours, whether the crew were ever aware of the deviation, and precisely what sequence of errors at what stage of the flight produced the track that was flown, none of these questions have been answered to the satisfaction of investigators who have studied the case in detail. The aircraft came down in deep water, and the flight recorders were recovered by Soviet forces, who denied their existence for years. When the recorders were finally made available after the fall of the Soviet Union, they provided only partial answers and deepened certain aspects of the mystery about what the crew knew and when. If you want to help choose the next video topic, join our Telegram. Links in the description. Otherwise, click right here to watch The Worst Witch Trials Ever Recorded in History next.